Hello Godzilla and monster fans, welcome to my second review into the Godzilla franchise. Today we're going to be reviewing Godzilla Raids Again, and this is the sequel and the second film in the Godzilla franchise to the original 1954 Godzilla. This came out 1 year after the original, and it was very rushed. Toho, for some reason, wanted to rush out a sequel to the original 1954 Godzilla, and while I understand it was a very good film, and I would see why Toho would want to make a sequel to that original 1954 classic monster film. It's a little, but at the time it wasn't considered that. In fact, Japanese critics considered it from mixed to negative. Maybe the audience loved it, but it doesn't seem like the critics in Japan were too keen on it. Once American critics in 1956, when the re-edit came out 2 years later, the Americanized version, which I didn't want to review or touch upon, which is the lesser version, is when American critics started to give good reviews of the film, and Japan critics changed their minds and started to realize how good of a film this actually was. But I guess maybe audience reaction was or Toho wanted to strike while the iron was still hot, because they rushed a sequel a year later. And honestly, if you could tell from my last video when I was dreading this one, it's not a very well known sequel to most Godzilla fans in this franchise. It's pretty forgettable, actually. Most Godzilla fans don't even consider this one that great. The American version is even worse than the original, and that's saying something. I should explain. And the American and some of the American stuff, is pretty stupid. They changed a lot of what made the original Godzilla well. Japan did the same for the Japanese version, but they weren't as bad. Actually, watching the Japanese version was a little bit better than the American version, but it still wasn't that great of a film. So, yeah, I'm in the most of people in the Godzilla fandom who don't consider this film that great and consider it a weak sequel. So let's dive in to this sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, and see what's good and bad about it. What I think is good and bad about it, and why I think it was a bad idea for them to rush a sequel out a year later. So without further ado, let's get started. So the plot of the 1955 Godzilla Raids Again is this. So after atomic blasts are detonated off the coast of Japan, this activates a prehistoric monster. That's it. That's really all it. And unlike the original Godzilla, where there was only one monster, which was the king of the monsters himself, this time we have two. Godzilla comes back, obviously, because he's in the title, and Anguirus in his first appearance in the Godzilla franchise. And I like Anguirus a lot, just not in this film. And that's too bad, because honestly, a Godzilla vs. Anguirus film sounds pretty fucking awesome. It should be a lot better, but they screwed it up. So if you remember in my last video, I explained that the Godzilla franchise isn't really keen on human characters, and I don't really focus on that. I focus more on the monsters, but I do have to at least mention the humans to say whether they're good, bad, or just okay. There's only 2 or 3 characters memorable from this film. And that's disappointing, because the characters in the original film were a lot more better. They were a rare exception. It's clear that this film didn't carry over with that. None of the characters from the original film return. Emiko and her husband, or soon-to-be husband, don't return at all. The only character that returns in this film for a few seconds, like a brief cameo, is Professor Yamane, who was Emiko's father in the original. He does come back and to explain that they did everything that happened in the original film, and yes, this is a direct sequel. So everything that did happen in the original film isn't, wiped away in the sequel. They obviously know that, but obviously this means we have a different Godzilla this time because they killed the original. And there's two characters I'll probably mention in this film, but as far as Professor Yamani's cameo in this film, I actually do enjoy it. I like when he's talking about, all the incidents in the original film, which is a far better film than this one that could ever hope to be. And it was good that they at least got one character from the original film to give us that sense of continuity, but to see someone from the past again. But obviously we gotta talk about the new characters that are introduced in this. And there's only, I think, 2 that are worth mentioning. I mean, I did say maybe 3, but honestly, it's really hard to remember these names. So there's an annoying character named Kubayashi, I think his name is. He's one of the he's, I think, the co-star of this film, and honestly, he's a very annoying character. I don't really care for him at all. In fact, he's pretty forgettable, to be quite honest. Nothing's interesting about his character. He just is a friend that's there for our main character and his soon-to-be wife, I think. I don't know. This film's so bland that I don't really keep track of the characters. And the characters aren't really the main focus anyways in this film franchise. But like I said, I do have to mention them. Kubayashi is easily my least favorite character in this film. I just don't find anything about him interesting. He's not even acceptable. He's not, at least acceptable to follow. He's pretty boring, actually. In fact, his death is one of the stupidest deaths I've ever seen. Thank God Godzilla fucking got rid of that piece of garbage and just get that idiot off the screen. He doesn't die until near the end of the film, but Godzilla wastes his ass real quick. So this idiot has so in this scene that I'm about to show you, this idiot, for some fucking reason, decides to dive bomb Godzilla, despite the fact that Godzilla has an atomic breath and could easily kick his ass in a second. He doesn't even need his atomic breath. He could probably just take that plane and fucking rip it apart. But no, this idiot thinks, oh, I gotta go dive bomb and attack Godzilla with my usual military fire, even though it doesn't do jack shit. So he does that, and this is what the death scene is like. Look at this and tell me how fucking hilarious and stupid this is. What's even more dumb about this death scene is that after this death scene, his friend, who I actually don't mind, barely shows any emotion, and they don't come up with the bright idea, and then they finally come up with the bright idea to bury Godzilla in ice because this fucking idiot plane explodes. And the ice comes down and buries a little bit of Godzilla, so they get the bright idea, let's bury Godzilla with ice and cause an avalanche. Yeah, that's a great idea, but why did the dumbass have to do that for you guys to realize that? You could have saved his goddamn life, but it's not like I give a shit about his character. It's one of the funniest and dumbest deaths I've ever seen. This idiot thinks he can take on Godzilla, which he clearly can't. And like, obviously, he was gonna die. But thank God we got rid of that idiot. And everyone's getting all emotional, like, oh, Kobayashi. And I'm like, really? I didn't really care that he died. Although I did sympathize with his friend for it, and I'll talk about his friend in a second. His friend is a much better character. He's a much better character to follow. He's probably the only character in this film that I may actually like. So the character that I'm going to talk about is, I think his name is Tsukioka. I think his name is. It's really hard to pronounce his name, but Tsukioka. It's really hard to fucking say that. He's our main character, and he's pretty good at his job. You know, flying all the planes. He cares about, you know, his lover. He cares about his friend. He has a likable personality that I don't find him annoying like Kobayashi is. And that's pretty good, at least, that we at least have somewhat of a likable protagonist. I don't know what's so great about him. I mean, there's nothing really stand out about him. I guess it's just because he helps everyone out and you know, is always willing to help everyone. You know, he's a very generous guy, and I don't feel like that's an annoying quality for him. I actually think it helps his character a little bit, because we did have a nice character in the previous film, so having another nice one, a male character, was pretty good. But he doesn't have an in-depth story like Serizawa did in the original, or, you know, at least anything likable like Emiko and her lover. But he's at least likable like Emiko and her lover, where they have charming personalities, where I don't find him annoying and I find him acceptable. And although he shows little emotion when his fucking idiot friend dies, I do like the ending where he finishes off Godzilla, delivers the final blow, burying him in ice, which is, by the way, a really dumb Godzilla death. But, well, it's not really a death, but just a dumb ending for Godzilla. And I like how you see some emotion from his eyes. You know, he looks like he's about to cry, and he says that was for Kobayashi, and that was actually kind of a touching scene, and it was really a good emotional scene for that character.
小林、とうとうゴジラをやっつけたぞ。
Honestly, though, none of the other characters I even have a clue remembering. I mean, there are many dumb and funny moments in this film that, honestly, it baffles me what direction they took this film in. But yeah, he has a lover. Not really that. She doesn't really have that much of a personality, anyways. And I'm not really going to talk about her because I don't feel like it. And then there are the people he works with, and then there's like this segment where police officers and convicts are. It's not really that. It's just the two main characters that are memorable. So let's get on to talking about the monsters. Godzilla and Anguirus are our two main monsters. Now, considering how the last film showed that Godzilla was by himself and fighting the military, it doesn't surprise me that they figured that shit's gonna get boring if we do that again. So let's amp up the stakes a little bit and have another monster join in Godzilla and have them fight and cause even more destruction than if one monster was upon them. Which I actually think makes this film a little bit better. It's just the fights are shit. Godzilla and Anguirus' fight could have been so much better, and it could have really lifted this film from the dull-ass characters that they have, except for one. But instead, it just goes down to a bunch of hugging and pushing. Like, what the fuck? Like, Godzilla and Anguirus need to do some awesome moves. We should be watching awesome monsters kick the shit out of each other. And instead, we're watching them fucking hug and push each other like they're little kids. And you know what makes it even worse? Like, one of the fucking scenes are sped up to where the fight doesn't seem as realistic as, you know, all the destruction in the first film. It loses the size and impact of the monsters. It makes them look like fucking ragdolls. It doesn't look real, and it's a shame. I mean, I know it came out in 1955, but if it went a little slower, had they not overcranked it and made it faster, it would have been so much better. But even then, the fight was pretty much just down to pushing and shoving, and that's really all I can say. I mean, just look at the scene where this is a good example. Godzilla is like Godzilla and Anguirus are fighting each other, and it's so fast that it doesn't look like two monsters fighting. It's crap. I mean, just look at it and give me your own interpretation of what you think of this scene. It doesn't look cool at all. But besides that dumb scene, there's actually one good moment for Godzilla, which is kind of saying much considering his character is not as great as you would have liked. Both Godzilla and Anguirus aren't that great. Anguirus is fine. I mean, he has a great roar. He's a good monster. He just doesn't have a good fight with Godzilla. Godzilla stinks. And I mean that. And that's a shame to say, because I fucking love Godzilla. But he is not Godzilla in this film. At least not the normal one. Not the one we had in the first film. Besides, first I have to mention why this is stupid. First off, the fights he has with Anguirus, again, are crap. And I just showed you why they're crap. I mean, just look at how sped up they were. And besides the fights being crap, although it's not present much in the Japanese version, because Godzilla's roar is changed and sounds like shit. His original roar, which was so iconic, so great, and made me so pumped every time he was on screen, they use it, but not as much as they should have. Instead, they have Anguirus' roars replaced for Godzilla's roars, which pisses me off, because that's not what Godzilla should sound like. He should have the iconic roar that we all know and love, and instead they change it to fucking Anguirus' roar. I mean, that's fine for Anguirus, but we don't need that for Godzilla. I mean, it's not as much prevalent in this Japanese version with English subtitles, but in the American version, they use the shit out of it, and it sucks. And I remember watching the American version the first time I saw this movie, and I did not like it. It was crap. I was really not happy that they changed the roar. It fucked up what made Godzilla so great. I mean, it changed everything, and it went in a completely different direction that nobody fucking wanted. So yeah, the fights were shit. Godzilla's roars were changed, and then although that's not, and I watched the Japanese version this time, so although that's Anguirus, the shitty roar is not there as much, they don't use the iconic roar as much, and you could still hear a little bit of Anguirus' roar coming out of Godzilla, so it just ends up being as crap. The Japanese version is better, but it's still shit. But yeah, and the way they finish off Godzilla stinks. But I will say, the way Godzilla finishes Anguirus is actually kind of cool. Like, I like when he fucking bites Anguirus on the neck, which is hilarious, by the way. I mean, this whole fight is just fucking hilarious. I mean, it's so bad, but it's so funny to watch. And then he fucking he uses atomic breath and wasted his ass, like, real quick. Like, just look at how awesome this scene is when you look at it. It's probably the best Godzilla and Anguirus scene, and it's not a bad death for Anguirus. I mean, it's pretty goofy, it's pretty crap way for Anguirus to go, to just get bitten on the neck and but at least the atomic breath makes it kind of better. I mean, I've heard people say that this death is kind of crap. Well, I mean, I don't know if I've heard people say that. I think people have. I mean, I know people have said the fights are crap, which is true. The fights are crap, but I don't know. I kind of like how Godzilla takes out Anguirus. It isn't that bad. I mean, just look at it and and judge it for yourself whether you think the way Godzilla takes out Anguirus is good or not. But honestly, overall, this is just a very forgettable movie. I mean, there's not much for me to say about this sequel. It's just not as impactful as the original. I had so much more to say. Talk about more characters and their story. Talk about the monster, Godzilla, and how great he was. There were so many great scenes in it. I wasn't able to use every scene. I wanted to show all of Godzilla's death and destruction. And there's no stakes this time. All the people are safe. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's fine. I mean, but if you're going to substitute that with a monster fight, you gotta at least have an entertaining monster fight. Otherwise, it just sucks. And because the monster fights suck, it really doesn't make this film that all great. I don't hate the film, and I don't think it's downright offensive. And I wasn't necessarily bored by it, I would say. It just was very forgettable. I just didn't remember what I was watching. I just watched it and immediately thought, well, this exists. And that's all I can say. It exists. But it's not a very good sequel to the Godzilla franchise. And it's a shame. And it shows how rushing a sequel out isn't exactly the best plan to do. They really, really should have waited, or they should have just at least did something similar to the original. You know, kept that tone that the original had. The music isn't even that great. I mean, when in the music in the original, I was pumped. I was enthralled. I wanted to see Godzilla and the military go head to head, and that's not something that I usually, that sounds entertaining. But the movie made it good, and that extra layer made it so much better. And the atmosphere and the symbolism Godzilla had in the original film, because that's lost in this film. Godzilla isn't any symbolism. I mean, the atomic testing is mentioned, but he's unlike the original film where he was a symbol for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and how the nuclear bombs were not that great, and them doing all that testing was really bad, and it come back to bite him in the ass. And we had likable characters, we had great music, and we had an iconic monster wreaking havoc and killing all these people. And that was great in the original, but this one just has the opposite. The character's very forgettable in this film. There's not much. There's only one character that's fine to follow, and the others are very forgettable. Godzilla and Anguirus aren't even that great. Their fights aren't that good, and it's just, it should have been a lot better of a sequel, and it shouldn't have been rushed. I don't know if they had waited that it would have been a good sequel, but regardless, this just isn't a good sequel, and it's very forgettable. There's nothing I can really say about it. There's only one or two things that I really like about this film, but honestly, it's just forgettable. It exists, but it's forgettable. So let's just go right into my final thoughts about Godzilla Raids Again. Well, my final verdict on Godzilla Raids Again is going to be, let's see, 1 star out of 5. Well, so yeah, I said 1 star. I was thinking 2, but it's just too forgettable. Sure, we have at least a somewhat likable character, and there's a little bit of stuff that Godzilla and Anguirus do that's okay, but overall it's just a forgettable film, and I really cannot recommend this film. If you want to watch Godzilla Raids Again, if you're marathoning the franchise then I guess give it a shot. But I would recommend you watch the Japanese version with the English subtitles, because it at least will make it a more bearable experience. It's forgettable, but it's not as downright offensive as the American version. The American version, if I could, I would give it a 0 because it sucks ass, but I can't. I would give the American version a 1 too, because that's just what it is. It doesn't really matter that what version it is, because it's just not a good movie either way. I'm sorry, but it just isn't. At least not in my opinion. I mean, maybe you have a different opinion out there, but honestly, I don't recommend this film if you've watched the franchise and you're thinking, which Godzilla film do you want to watch? Don't watch this one. This one is very forgettable, and it just doesn't do justice to the characters that of this film, and the monsters. The iconic monster that we had in the first film was ruined in this one, and Anguirus was not utilized well as he could have been, and these fights were just boring. They just weren't as great as they could have been. But anyway, that's just my take on Godzilla Raids Again. It's a very forgettable sequel, and I was thinking of giving it, like I said, I was thinking of giving it a 2, but it really deserves a 1 because it's just so that forgettable. It's just a weak sequel. It was rushed, and it should have never been released so quickly after the original. I get that the original was financially great, and they probably knew they had a hit on their hands, but this just shows that when you rush out a sequel, it's just not a great idea. And also, if they gave it maybe more time, maybe it could have been better. Who knows? I mean, I can't be for sure, but it just isn't that great. So I don't recommend this film. If you're marathoning the franchise and this is your first time seeing it, watch the Japanese version with subtitles. It's not very hard to find. The American version is more prevalent, and it came out the same year, I think, but steer clear from the American version, because unless if you're curious, because it'll only frustrate you more how badly they portrayed it. It's really worse. The narration, the name change, the roars are a lot more prevalent. The Anguirus roars that Godzilla makes in Raids Again is more prevalent in the American film than it is the Japanese film. But the Japanese film still barely uses the roars, so it sucks. But anyways, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and give it a like. Comment down below your thoughts about Godzilla Raids Again. If you enjoyed this film, please tell me your thoughts why you like this film. I mean, are there any Raids Again fans? Do you think it's okay, or are you like the majority like me who don't really like this film and think it's a very terrible sequel and it should just stay forgotten, and and that Godzilla fans should steer clear of it? Whatever your thoughts are on this film, please leave it down below, and I would love to hear your take on this film compared to the original. If you want more Godzilla content or any other content on this channel like this, subscribe for more, because for my summer special, I'll be reviewing as much of the Godzilla franchise as I can. I've already done, I did the original, now I've done Raids Again. So if you want to keep up with the summer special, please do subscribe, and I also have other content as well that maybe you might be interested in, so go ahead and do that. But besides that, thank you guys so much for joining me for this review. I know this wasn't a really great movie to talk about, but I wanted to at least get it out of the way, and it's part of the franchise, and not every movie is going to be good, so I might as well give my thoughts about it. So, but yeah, that's what I think of Godzilla Raids Again, and thank you guys for joining me. And next week we will be reviewing King Kong vs. Godzilla. Oh boy, I cannot wait for that one. That one's going to be fun to review, at least from my memory. Let's hope it's a lot better than this film. But thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next video. And as always, peace out.